Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kasey. I am leading Upstage AI in the US. And I was looking at the agenda for this conference, and I realized I'm probably like 99th talk on AI. So I'm trying to change up a little and actually talk about something more fun, hoping to make your afternoon session a little bit more entertaining. And what I mean by that is my first job, my first career was actually at Tesla. That was before Tesla was cool. I thought that I was losing in my career game by joining this company. But working at Tesla, and then later on I worked at Facebook, I was always been in the kind of like frontier technology company, but in a business and strategic finance role where my role was to evaluate how do we adopt the technology as a tech company to make this business successful. And I think largely here, all of us here are in that race, in a just different industry. So I wanted to tie what I've seen working at Tesla and how that relates to the framework that we can think about in terms of making investment into AI. All right. So let's start with a humbling quote from Elon Musk. This is April 2018. And this was actually a quote. If you look up the Bloomberg article of Elon Musk, this is what he said, that excessive automation was a mistake and humans are underrated. How many of you actually remember the moment where Tesla was really struggling to scale the Model 3 production around that time? Please raise your hand. All right, so I would say like 30% of you heard about this. And I'm assuming not everyone was paying attention to Tesla or too young to remember those times. So let me kind of walk you through what happened back then. So around 2018, that's when Tesla was trying to become a mature company, meaning they wanted to be an actual automotive company that can mass produce the car. Until that point, Tesla was producing Roadster, Model S and X, luxurious toys for the ultra-rich people. But that couldn't justify the scale and the ambition that they wanted to pursue. So Tesla made a commitment that by end of 2018, they're going to produce 5,000 cars per week. In Q4 2017, they actually produced total 1,000 cars in the entire quarter. So we're moving from 1,000 cars in a quarter to 5,000 cars per week. And that was in brand new facility based in Fremont, California, where I worked. And we were talking about the brand new product and brand new assembly line. So what made Elon Musk so ambitious? He's Elon, but the secret and the potential that we saw back then was the automation. We interviewed thousands of vendors across the world that we believe has the best robotics for different parts of the assembly line. And our ambition was that we're going to deploy more than 1,000 robots all across the line, starting from assembling the battery pack all the way to putting the windshield. We were planning out all the robots that we're going to deploy, and we did a lot of POCs. We did test the performance that it promised. We tested the throughput, each section of the assembly line where the robotics were promised to deliver the performance. And the whole premise behind that was we need to remove humans from the process because humans are the friction. When we have a handover from one human to another, one automation to another human, that's when the handover happens, and that's when you slow things down, especially in the manufacturing line. Think of it, this is a marathon, and then you have to it's a relay, and then you have to hand over the baton. And that if you're not running when the person ahead of you is coming to you, you're gonna lose your baton. And that's exactly what they saw in the process, and they wanted to automate that. But by April, we were at 2,000 cars per week. That is 40% of the goal that we had. And we were already 40%, more than 40% into the year. And again, that's when Tesla was not a scale that we see right now. We were burning through hundreds of millions of dollars every week just to upkeep the assembly line that just did not work. And we had to hire a lot of people, which I'm going to show you in the next slide, to keep up with the 2,000 cars per week kind of situation. And again, if anyone remembers that time, Tesla was a joke in Wall Street. Everyone was mocking, okay, this luxury toy company is never going to turn into an actual business. And whenever we had an earnings call, our stock was a roller coaster all over. They was going down for 10%, 15%. It was a terrible situation because, again, we were borrowing so much money to build up this factory and buy all these robotics. So we're a junk bond. So we're paying a huge interest rate without having the production that takes care of the top line. So we were not reaching the top line goal, but we are burning through the money. And that was a terrible situation. And the company was at a major risk, and we were actually defaulted and bankrupted so many times. It's just that banks haven't called us bankrupt. So how do we turn this around? The answer was a giant tent with hundreds of people in the parking lot. So imagine if you saw the circus tent, right? That's what we did in the parking lot. And it was not permitted, so we went into a major lawsuit later on. But it was unpermitted, no electricity, no air conditioning in the middle of the summer. And literally you see in the picture that hundreds of temporary workers were hired to manually put together these cars. And again, there was no electricity, so we had a steel plate underneath the car that carries the cars halfway through. And each section, when we were done manually assembling things, we pushed the steel plate to the next one, and then somebody comes in and put things together. It was a disaster. And just in case anyone is curious what I was doing there, I was in finance org. My job during the daytime was to bring money to the company at all costs. You don't know what we're going to borrow against. I was borrowing against the bolts and nuts. I was probably borrowing against the furniture in the office. What you have on the right side is the agenda. It's a sample. But my job was I would pick up an investment banker from New York, pick them up at the SFO or Vegas airport, tour them around the Gigafactory in Vegas, and then take them to the Fremont factory to show them we have all these shiny robotics. It's so cool. We never tour the tent, but we'll tour the factory and tell them, this is so cool, this is the future, please help us borrow money against it. That's what we were doing. And during the daytime, that's what it did. But after the working hour, everyone, including CFO, everyone, was volunteering end of the production line, meaning we're putting the windshield, I was vaulting into the car seat, and I was detailing the car, all using diesel, so much for working in the clean energy company. And it was a disaster. But what I'm really excited to share with you today is not about how Tesla failed. It's about how Elon turned it around. And I think it teaches us so much about what it really takes to adopt new technology and transform our business. What Elon did is, again, this was all over the news if you're interested afterward. He slept on the Fremont factory floor for good half year. And I think there was a record that he set that for 2 weeks he didn't leave the building. He lived inside the building. And he would grab a foam roller because his back hurts, and he would walk around the assembly line and across the office and identify where his time is needed. And it's extremely complicated assembly line, so it's really, really hard to understand where the problem exists. So what we did as a first step is we mapped the process. So we had a 5,000 cars per week as a company target. You can break that down into per month, per week, per team, per person, per section of the assembly line. We created dashboards everywhere to visualize what the exact steps of the work look like. And we had a kind of a traffic light situation where if it's working well, we're hitting the target, it's green. If it doesn't hit, it's yellow. If it's broken, it's red. And Elon will be there when it's red. So once we map the process, he embedded himself into those red alerted areas. He would sit behind you. He would stand behind you. So the picture is kind of misleading. He's not really like nicely conversing with you. He would sit behind you and observe how you solve the problem. First of all, if you don't know what's wrong, then you're gone. But if you can explain what is wrong, then he will sit down with you and talk about how we can solve this. So then we would go through like iteration of the solution to actually solve this problem. And then we look at the impact across the entire workflow. Not just the isolated impact. We would measure the impact across the assembly line. And once we understand the overall impact, then we will update and change the system around that new process that we just developed. So I promise you that I'll bring this back to insurance. I'm seeing the same thing here. Everyone is talking about AI agents, but when I talk to the leadership, almost no one can describe what their actual underwriter work process look like in 15 steps. And that is the real problem that I see in the industry, not just insurance, I think overall enterprise space where we talk about adopting a new technology. There is a process gap, but I think the biggest problem is so many people who are working on the field are not able to articulate all the nuanced processes that they have to go through to make things work to the leadership. So there's a whole gap in communication. And somebody needs to go in like Elon, or it can be a collective effort to really map out this process. So the framework that I want to introduce you today, lesson learned from working with Elon at Tesla, is very simple, 3 steps. First is you have to map the process, map the work. We have to understand how people are actually working, not what's written on the SOP, the actual workflow. And the second is we have to start small and really think about the micro efficiency that you can stack up to make the bigger ROI. And the third step is really important, is we need to loop in humans. Again, what Elon did is not about thinking about next robot to replace. He sat down and talked to the domain expert of that line, really understand the problem, and then use that feedback to fix the process. Humans are the adaptive layer in this whole journey with the new technology. In a sense that when technology is moving so fast, we're talking about generative AI last year, we're talking about agentic AI next year. The key here is if you're trying to replace one technology to another each time, that's where we fail to really embed the technology into our human society, human business. So really, we need to train the people to understand and be that cohesive power to bring the technology together and make sure that what we build for technology layer reflects and have the functionality to reflect the human feedback into the system. Because as much as AI agents have huge potential and will change the way that we do the business, ultimately, the societies, we are all here, and insurance is to de-risk the civilization that we built. We need a human knowledge to improve and iterate through and with the technology.